Welcome, everyone. Today is a national holiday, Martin Luther King Day. In 1985, Congress passed a law, signed by President Ronald Reagan, that made the third Monday of January a national holiday in his honor. This year, the day falls on January 15th, his actual birthday. He was born 95 years ago today. No doubt, you know that Dr. King was a great leader of the civil rights movement of the 1950s and early 60s. We just heard the theme song for the movement, We Shall Overcome. Overcome what? Racial prejudice and discrimination. The first target of the civil rights movement was the system of segregation in the South. In that system, enforced by law, black people, or Negroes, as they were called then, were often kept separate from whites. They were restricted to inferior facilities or denied services altogether. Often, they were denied the better jobs and even the right to vote. Martin Luther King experienced all of this in his hometown of Atlanta, Georgia. Whenever King himself describes his experiences in his writings, Layla will read his words. Listen to what he says.
There was a pretty strict system of segregation in Atlanta. For a long, long time, I could not go swimming until there was a Negro YMCA. A Negro child in Atlanta could not go to any public park. I could not go to the so-called white schools. In many of the stores downtown, I couldn't go to a lunch counter to buy a hamburger or a cup of coffee. I could not attend any of the theaters. There were 1 or 2 Negro theaters, but they didn't get any of the main pictures. If they did get them, they got them 2 or 3 years later.
Imagine having to grow up in that situation. It was all so unfair. Martin Luther King, along with thousands of others of all races, set out to change all this. It was difficult and dangerous work. In the end, it cost the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King his life. Why did he do it? What made Martin Luther King tick? Why was he so passionate about civil rights and racial justice? Where did he find the strength to carry on such a difficult struggle? Why did he choose the way of love when he faced so much hatred? Today, we'll look briefly at King's early life to get some clues about the person that he was. Martin Luther King Jr. was born and raised in Atlanta, Georgia, where his parents and grandparents shared the same house. He was the middle child of 3 children. His mother was a school teacher, and both his grandfather and father were pastors of Ebenezer Baptist Church in Atlanta. It was his family life that laid the foundation for Martin's strong religious faith.
It is quite easy for me to think of a God of love, mainly because I grew up in a family where love was central and where lovely relationships were ever present. It is quite easy for me to lean more towards optimism than pessimism about human nature, mainly because of my childhood experiences.
Of course, the church was also very influential in his life.
The church has always been a second home for me. As far back as I can remember, I was in church every Sunday. My best friends were in Sunday school, and it was the Sunday school that helped me to build the capacity for getting along with people.
It was at church, too, that Martin learned the power of the spoken word and picked up the skills of public speaking as he listened to his father's sermons. Also, music that touched the soul and inspired people was a central part of African American worship. King developed a lifelong love of the hymns and Negro spirituals that he heard in church. Here's a clip from a church service in Chicago where Dr. King preached and Mahalia Jackson sang. She was close friends of Martin, and you will see why he often turned to her for inspiration when he was low on energy and low on hope. Here, she leads the congregation in singing the old spiritual Joshua Fight, the Battle of Jericho. It gives you a taste of traditional black worship. So the young Martin Luther King was strongly shaped by his family and his church. It is fortunate that he had such a strong foundation of love and faith, for he soon encountered the ugliness of segregation.
From the age of 3, I had a white playmate who was about my age. We always felt free to play our childhood games together. At the age of 6, we both entered school, separate schools, of course. I remember how our friendship began to break as soon as we entered school. This was not my desire, but his. The climax came when he told me one day that his father had demanded that he would play with me no more. I never will forget what a great shock this was to me. I immediately asked my parents about the motive behind such a statement. We were at the dinner table when the situation was discussed, and here, for the first time, I was made aware of the existence of a race problem. I had never been conscious of it before. As my parents discussed some of the tragedies that had resulted from this problem and some of the insults they themselves had confronted on account of it, I was greatly shocked. And from that moment on, I was determined to hate every white person. As I grew older and older, this feeling continued to grow. My parents would always tell me that I should not hate the white man, but that it was my duty as a Christian to love them. The question arose in my mind: how could I love a race of people who hated me and who had been responsible for breaking me up with one of my best childhood friends? This was a great question in my mind for a number of years.
As you entered the theater today, you were given a program. Each of those programs has a little colored star sticker on it, and each color represents a different race. Imagine that you're only allowed to hang out with and be friends with those of your own race. I invite you to participate in a little experiment, if you're only comfortable with doing it. Will those who have a blue star on your program please stand up? Only those with blue stars. Look around. How many of your friends would you lose? Okay, please sit down, and thank you. And now those with silver stars, please stand up. Right here. Okay, please sit down, and now those with green stars, please stand up. Again, look around. Only those with green stars can be your friends. Thank you. Finally, those with gold stars. Thank you. Please sit down. I'll wait for them to die down. How lame would it be if we could only hang out with those in our own group? Part of what makes the world so interesting is getting to know people from different backgrounds. But society sent the young Martin a very different message.
My mother confronted the age-old problem of the Negro parent in America: how to explain discrimination and segregation to a small child. She taught me that I should feel a sense of somebodyness, but that, on the other hand, I had to go out and face a system that stared me in the face every day, saying, "You are less than, you are not equal to." She told me about slavery and tried to explain the divided system in the South. She made it clear that she opposed this system and that I must never allow it to make me feel inferior. You are as good as anyone. At this time, Mother had no idea that the little boy in her arms would years later be involved in a struggle against the system she was speaking of.
Martin describes another incident that was very important in his life.
When I was 14, I traveled from Atlanta to Dublin, Georgia, with a dear teacher of mine, Mrs. Bradley. I participated in an oratorical contest there, and I succeeded in winning the contest. My subject, ironically enough, was the Negro and the Constitution. That night, Mrs. Bradley and I were on a bus returning to Atlanta. Along the way, some white passengers boarded the bus, and the white driver ordered us to get up and give the whites our seats. We didn't move quickly enough to suit him, so he began cursing us. I intended to stay right in that seat, but Mrs. Bradley urged me up, saying we had to obey the law. We stood up in the aisle for 90 miles to Atlanta. That night will never leave my memory. It was the angriest I have ever been in my life.
How would you have felt if you were in Martin's shoes that night? Hey, what's going on down there?
Give us your seats. We were here first. So what? We're blues. You're greens. Give us your seats.
Fine, not moving.
Well, we'll see about that.
What's going on over here?
These two troublemakers won't give us their seats.
We were here long before they came along. You know the rules. Get moving! Now, or you can sit in jail as long as you want.
The incident with the playmate and the one on the bus are only two of the many experiences Martin had with racial injustice.
I had grown up harboring not only segregation, but also the oppressive and barbarous acts that grew out of it. I had seen police brutality with my own eyes and watched Negroes receive the most tragic injustice in the courts. I remember seeing the Ku Klux Klan actually beat a Negro. I had passed spots where Negroes had been savagely lynched. All of these things did something to my growing personality.
It would not be surprising if Martin Luther King had continued to hate white people. But fortunately, he also had other experiences that opened his eyes to the possibility that things could be different. Martin entered college at the tender age of 15. Yeah, 15. He could do that because he skipped the 9th and 12th grades. Imagine, no senior skip day, but senior skip year. And think of all the things he missed, like 2 years worth of exams. Anyway, Martin didn't have to leave home. Like his father and grandfather before him, he went to Morehouse College in Atlanta. It was a college founded in 1867 specifically for newly freed black men after the Civil War. But before that,
Just before going to college, I went to Simsbury, Connecticut, and worked a whole summer on a tobacco farm to earn a little school money to supplement what my parents were doing. I wrote to my father. On our way here, we saw some things I had never anticipated to see. After we passed Washington, there was no discrimination at all. The white people here are very nice. We go to any place we want and sit anywhere we want to. As soon as I entered college, I started working with the organizations that were trying to make racial justice a reality. The wholesome relations we had in the intercollegiate council generation, I had been ready to resent the whole white race. But as I got to see more of white people, my resentment was softened, and a spirit of cooperation took its place. I was at the point where I was deeply interested in political matters and social ills. I could envision myself playing a part in breaking down the legal barriers to Negro rights.
King also began to see that white people, as well as black people, could suffer from economic justice.
During my late teens, I worked 2 summers, against my father's wishes. He never wanted me to work around white people because of the oppressive conditions, in a plant that hired both Negroes and whites. Here, I saw economic injustice firsthand and realized that the poor white was exploited just as much as the Negro. Through these early experiences, I grew up deeply conscious of the varieties of injustice in our society.
In the end, love won out over hate in the heart of Martin Luther King Jr. After a period in his teens of questioning and rejecting the Christian faith, he returned to faith in the teachings of Jesus. And Jesus, after all, taught the way of love, even love for your enemies. Martin continued to hate segregation and injustice, but he chose to hate the sin and love the sinner. He began to see that those who carried prejudice and hatred in their hearts were also victims of segregation. He believed that they could be redeemed, could be set free from their prejudice, and learn the way of brotherhood and sisterhood. To summarize, by the time Martin, at age 25, took his first job as a pastor in Montgomery, Alabama, he had made 3 core commitments that would shape the rest of his life. First, he would not compromise with injustice, but would fight against it. Second, he would not fight injustice with violence, but with nonviolent love. Third, he would not accept division, but would work to foster the beloved community, where people of all races and creeds could live in mutual harmony and respect. So, fight injustice with nonviolent love to build the beloved community. These 3 commitments were soon put to severe tests. He had only been in Montgomery a little over a year when Rosa Parks refused to give up her bus seat to a white man. Martin was put in charge of the Montgomery bus boycott, which lasted for 381 days. During that time, he received many death threats. One night, his home was bombed, while his wife and baby daughter were inside. But even after that, King held to his convictions. This is what he said, one of the nightly boycotts.
The aftermath of nonviolence is the creation of the beloved community. The aftermath of nonviolence is redemption. The aftermath of nonviolence is reconciliation. The aftermath of violence, however, is bitterness. And this is the thing I'm concerned about. Let us fight passionately and unrelentingly for the goals of justice and freedom. Let's be sure that our hands are clean in the struggle. Let us never fight with falsehood and violence and hate and malice, but always fight with love, so that when the day comes that the walls of segregation have completely crumbled in Montgomery, that we will be able to live with people as their brothers and sisters. Oh, my friends, our aim must be not to defeat Mr. Englehart, not to defeat Mr. Sellers and Mr. Gale and Mr. Parks. Our aim must be to defeat the evil that's in them. But our aim must be to win the friendship of Mr. Gale and Mr. Sellers and Mr. Englehart. We must come to the point of seeing that our ultimate aim is to live with all men as brothers and sisters under God, and not be their enemies or anything that goes with that type of relationship. I'm coming to the conclusion now.
In the end, the boycott was successful in ending segregation on the buses. But of course, it was only the beginning of Dr. King's work for social change. Here's a clip of just a few of the highlights of his life and work.
Look at
I have a dream that one day this nation will rise up and live out the true meaning of its creed. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal.
Martin Luther King Jr. was born on January 15, 1929, and graduated as the valedictorian of Crozier Theological Seminary in 1951. King became pastor of a Baptist church in Montgomery, Alabama, and later completed his Ph.D.
Martin Luther King was a religious man. He was a pastor. He looked at racism and all of the so-called separate but equal laws and the terrible treatment of people of color in the United States. And he said, this is absolutely wrong. This is against God's will. This is not recognizing the dignity of peoples. And he made us all face that in very powerful ways.
On the eve of Rosa Parks' refusal to move to the back of a city bus in 1955, King was chosen to lead a citywide bus boycott. 2 years later, King and a group of civil rights activists formed the Southern Christian Leadership Conference to conduct nonviolent protests for civil rights.
When Martin Luther King led the Alabama boycott, That was a major turning point in the fight for civil rights. What you saw was people who had been fractionized coming together as one, walking together with others joining the fight. This was when people, America, the world, stood up and said, whoa, what are we looking at here? An amazing time.
Inspired by Gandhi's activism, King worked with the SCLC to organize black voters and civil rights protests. In 1963, King was arrested at a march in Alabama. During his prison time, King wrote a rebuttal to an article denouncing his methods. His longhand notes on the margins of the newspaper became known as Letter from Birmingham Jail and was famously republished and studied in colleges across the country.
Martin Luther King was a man of God who believed that that calling necessitated social change in the present, and he put his life on the line for that calling.
Free at last! Free at last! Thank God Almighty! We are free at last!
Dr. King and the civil rights movement of the 1950s and 60s accomplished a lot, but the work continues. May Martin Luther King inspire us to fight against injustice, to do so with love, and to help build the beloved community. Each of us can make a difference in our own circles of influence. You are never too young to make a difference. Thank you for your attention. When the bell rings, you will be dismissed. Until then, let us hear some advice Dr. King had for young people. Happy Martin Luther King Day.
This is the most important and crucial period of your lives, for what you do now and what you decide now at this age may well determine which way your life shall go. And the question is whether you have a proper, a solid, and a sound blueprint. And I want to suggest some of the things that should be in your life's blueprint. Number one in your life's blueprint should be a deep belief in your own dignity, your own worth, and your own somebodyness. Don't allow anybody to make you feel that you are nobody. Always feel that you count. Always feel that you have worth. And always feel that your life has ultimate significance. Secondly, in your life's blueprint, you must have, as a basic principle, the determination to achieve excellence in your various fields of endeavor. You're going to be deciding as the days and the years unfold what you will do in life, what your life's work will be. Once you discover what it will be, set out to do it, and to do it well. Be a bush if you can't be a tree. If you can't be a highway, just be a trail. If you can't be the sun, be a star. For it isn't by size that you win or you fail. Be the best of whatever you are.